Do you think your investing plans will let you retire young? For nearly everyone buying ETFs, dividend-paying stocks, and using compound interest accounts, the answer is no. I know because I did this. 13 years ago, I started asking a different question. What actually creates the biggest fortunes through investing? The answer wasn't diversification, it wasn't day trading, and it definitely wasn't trying to predict the market. I'm Emlyn, and multiple 5 to 30x stock picks changed my life. In this video, I give you my full framework for you to do it yourself. I'm not a financial advisor, and this isn't financial advice. It's my framework based on my 20 years of trading and investing experience. Here's what we're going to cover: getting to 10x opportunities, how to find 10x stocks, when to buy and when to sell. Section 1. Getting to 10x opportunities. Most people put their money into stocks and ETFs randomly, maybe because of PE ratios, dividend yield, or because everyone says it's a hot stock, and then they hope it will go up so that they can retire someday. Meanwhile, fear comes every time the market crashes because of war in Iran, news that the AI bubble is about to burst, or one of the many unexpected events happening in our rapidly changing world. This is the path of fear and hope. While I was stuck on this path, slowly becoming more frustrated by a lack of progress, I realized I was only ever going to escape it if I was more intentional about looking for opportunities that would bring life-changing wealth. I needed to explicitly look for these opportunities if I was to participate in them. I needed to sleep easy and get over the anxiety and worry most people experience during market crashes. I thought maybe I could even benefit from them. But I needed to get to a path of intentional investing that would let me retire young. After 13 years tinkering and experimenting, I got it right. This section is effectively the challenge I needed to overcome so that I could teach it to others. I've built it into a framework that gets you from a path of fear and hope to a path of intentional investing that will change your life. I've tied it back to first principles so you'll feel confident acting on it. First, we're going to call an opportunity that potentially brings life-changing wealth a 10x opportunity, just to label it so that we know what we're speaking to. Because once we can define a 10x opportunity correctly, we know what we are looking for and we'll know if the thing we're looking at meets our criteria. In theory, there are many 10x opportunities. There are thousands of companies out there that say they will grow 10 times. You could also buy a stock and leverage yourself 10 times so that you can grow your money quicker for smaller moves. We now even have the ability to bet on everything from where Bitcoin will be in 15 minutes to election outcomes or even if war might break out. And in theory, you could get 2 or 3 bets right and 10x your money. How I define a 10x opportunity using first principles is by looking at the value an entity creates, how much society needs that value, the ability for the entity to execute to meet that need, how much the entity's price can go up when it meets that need, the valuation check. If you put it in the form of an equation, it looks like this: opportunity equals value created times need by society times execution ability. We'll apply the valuation check afterwards. An example to show this is, let's say a company makes 1 car per year. Just for simplicity, let's say it's an amazing flying car that's infinitely better than anything else. And society needs 10 of their flying cars per year. If we have 100% confidence that this company can meet that need, we have opportunity equals 1 times 10 times 100% equals 10, or 10x opportunity. To make this simple example work, we assume only we know this information and can act on it. Of course, if the whole world knew this, they would already have bought the company's shares and the share price would reflect it. This should show up in our valuation check as a high share price that expects the company to meet this need in future. As for time frame, I aim for 10x in 5 years, but at most 10 years. And even with 10x in 10 years, you're still beating Warren Buffett. Here's a quick practical example because this one had a big impact on me. We've all known for over a decade that climate change is a massive issue. Electric vehicles would be indispensable because continuing fossil fuel cars would eventually kill us. So we don't have a choice. It's EVs or death. In 2019, Tesla was the undoubted leader in EVs. I bought the shares at $15.80 when the company had a market cap of just $40 billion. They were making around 250,000 cars a year at the time. The opportunity to disrupt a 90 million cars a year market was enormous. If they went from making a few 100,000 cars to selling millions of cars, the share price would 10x. As they were already the leader, all they had to do was execute effectively and the rewards would come. I did quite a bit of homework on whether they did have the means to execute, but I eventually concluded that there was a high chance they could. Today they're around $400 for a more than 20x return. If you do this right, you reduce chance to a bare minimum. Inside the equation, Here we're going to break down the opportunity equation into the ideas and principles that underlie it. By breaking it down to its most essential building blocks, we can nearly eliminate uncertainty. Yes, that thing markets hate. We're going to eliminate it, at least in principle. We're going to start with value created. The first benefit of defining value creation from first principles is that we can clearly identify what it is, where it is, and how it helps a company grow. Fortunately, this is an easy one to define. Most people already know what value creation is. It's when you create new or more value with what you have. A simple example is, let's say you have flour and you bake a bread with it. You've created value. If your bread is tasty, healthy, widely available for people to buy, and all the ingredients come from sustainable farming methods, then you've created unique and undeniable value that sets your bread apart from most other breads available. You've invested your time, energy, and ingenuity to create something valuable to society. A real-world example is Tesla making a longer-lasting, safer, and more environmentally friendly electric vehicle compared to fossil fuel cars dominant at the time. I find it important to spell this out because when you read financial results of a company or financial newspapers, they get it wrong all the time. Most of the time, value creation is written about how high a company can make its stock price go up or how much more profits it can generate. Don't get me wrong, these are very important metrics for a company, but they become the targets of most companies when on a fundamental level they are indicators of what's going on at the company. And so they are derivatives of real-world value creation. Here's how. The share price going up can sometimes be the ultimate measure of how much wealth was created. Financial analysts, newspapers, and the financial world in general mostly write about how well management can do this. It's now gone mostly wrong because it's become the target of most companies, and when something becomes the target, it fails to be an effective measure of real-world value creation. Because management of many companies figured out a long time ago the easiest and quickest way to make the share price go up is simply to do a share buyback. Just spend the cash a company has on buying its own shares and the share price will go up. Then everyone writes about how well the company is doing. It often gets more people excited and others buy shares, making the share price go up even further. Meanwhile, management collects handsome bonuses for great performance. And there was no real-world value creation through innovation or investing in new and better products that customers bought. This is not a secret anymore. Since the 1980s, most companies' cash have gone to share buybacks. This explains why we've had an exploding stock market when most people feel like things have gotten worse. Or consider increasing profits. Of course, who doesn't want more profits? Except you need to want it in a way that's sustainable over the long term. Because one of the easiest ways to increase profits is to cut costs, typically done by cutting people. Of course, we have improvements in technology that over time will regularly make some roles redundant, but very often, companies have a profit number in mind they want to reach. They then see how much cost they need to cut to get there, and they then extrapolate how many people they need to cut to meet that number. Most of the time when I read about people being cut, it is that simple and that brutal. Of course, this does increase profits, which leads to a higher share price, but only in the short term. Most of the time, it leaves the company worse off and smaller over the long term. That's because it hurts the morale of employees who remain. They also have to work harder to make up for people who left, and customer experience is worsened. So some of the most common ways mainstream finance speaks of value creation, share buybacks and cutting costs, often creates no long-term value and sometimes even destroys it. This is probably the most important reason I came up with a framework for myself when I think about where to put my money. I just got so tired of reading so many financial analyst reports and opinion pieces that spoke about companies that are doing well because of stock buybacks and cost cutting. This is by definition financial engineering. No real value was created, and you run into a lot of trouble if you invest based on financial analysis of this type. Here's a quick example that shows this. Stellantis share price exploded in 2023 because of financial engineering, but collapsed the following year. This is just one example, but there's been countless. In my real-world example of Tesla, real value creation is Tesla builds a car that is more reliable and has less running costs than the fossil fuel equivalent. So whoever buys it gets value added to their lives because they worry less about breakdowns or car services. And they can then use the car for many more years than the fossil fuel equivalent. That Tesla had more earnings on the back of doing this at scale is the financial derivative of the real-world value they created. The earnings that went up is not the actual value that was created. It's the financial derivative that measures it. In an ideal world, we could just trust what companies and financial news media said, but because financially engineering better metrics have become common, I found it's necessary to validate the real-world value creation myself before I invest in anything. Value creation is really the purpose of a company, and if you define it correctly, it's easy to see which company is more useful to society, because it shows how much potential the company has as it meets society's needs. I'm not the first person to say this, but I want to highlight it because it has to be the foundation of any investment thesis. The next variable in our equation is need by society. Here I want to define it as the full or holistic need of society. I'm going to expand on this principle in a practical example by comparing it to TAM. TAM stands for Total Addressable Market and is a similar idea in finance. And here, need by society is distinctly different. It's different because a few things are often missed when looking at TAM. For example, in the case of Tesla, TAM may have looked at how many cars are sold in the world every year, or it might have looked only at the number of EVs sold. So many people were saying the market is too small to be relevant because not many EVs are sold every year, not enough batteries are made for a large market, EVs are expensive, range is too low, infrastructure is not there, and the world is not ready for it. All these factors led many to think that TAM for Tesla was small. If we instead looked at the need by society, we would realize and include the necessity of moving to EVs due to climate change, the harm done by fossil fuel cars due to pollution and human health. This negative value creation or value destruction is almost never considered. Said another way, society must have EVs because of climate change. Society must have EVs because of pollution and the harm done to human health from fossil fuel cars. For example, one US study looked at city kids and their test scores. It found that those who wait at the side of the road in the morning for the school bus scored lower purely because of the toxic fumes they breathed in. The impact on their health and doing worse at school is a cost not accounted for anywhere. They are effects TAM does not capture, and it inherently leads to major problems in how we value a company and the opportunity there is when we invest in it. In Tesla's case, TAM might have been small, but the need by society was huge. Disruption and the changing need by society. At the moment, disruption is causing rapid changes in society's needs. Massive markets and companies can face rapidly falling needs for their goods. Here we're going to use Toyota as an example. They've been a giant for decades and make good cars. You could say they are the best legacy automaker, maybe even the best car company for the last 3 decades. Toyota is known for making good, affordable, reliable cars that last a long time, and it's true. Even better, because of this universal recognition, you can expect a good resale value for your Toyota. This is their real-world value creation for customers and society. And back in the 1970s and 80s, this was huge. I remember my dad talking about how routine it was for cars to have a major breakdown within 2 years, even if you bought it new. Not Toyota though. Their cars you could drive for years as long as you serviced it regularly. Toyota breakdowns almost became a rare incident of bad luck. If it did break down, parts were widely accessible. They were also easy to fix. Many people could learn how to fix the most common problems after a short apprenticeship. But now we have the advent of electric cars. While a Toyota could routinely do 200,000 kilometers without a major breakdown, there are cases of EVs doing more than 1 million kilometers without a breakdown. You also don't have to service EVs as often as you do your Toyota, and electricity is cheaper than petrol or diesel. EVs used to be expensive, but in the last few years their purchase price has fallen and is now mostly in line with their petrol and diesel counterparts. So how is Toyota creating real-world value nowadays? They still make reliable petrol and diesel cars. This is the value they create. But society's need for these cars are falling, which means that Toyota's business face years of challenging headwinds because fossil fuel cars make up most of its business. They admitted it recently, saying that unless things change, they will not survive. They have some EVs, but they're not the best, and it's a small part of their business. Of course, they're still around and still sell a lot of fossil fuel cars. They're able to do it because they still have a great brand and they're monetizing that brand. It's like they built up a lot of goodwill with society and now they're cashing in on it. Things may change, of course. They might come out with a great EV with one of those solid-state batteries they've been talking about for many years. And it might differentiate themselves in a way where people think they're the leader of the technology that's taking over the world. While that might happen, it's not happening now. The gap between them and Tesla and the major Chinese EV makers are only widening. Toyota has now partnered with other companies like BYD to make a better EV. But the uncomfortable truth is Toyota's real-world value creation has dropped and society needs it even less. They're not alone. The story applies to nearly all legacy auto companies. It applied to nearly all mobile phone manufacturers when Apple released the iPhone. It applied to Blockbuster when Netflix came out. It's the standard story of disruption. This is where considering society's needs will save you countless times, because you would have been able to identify the reduced future potential of Blockbuster or legacy auto companies long before it happened. The same goes for oil, coal, and other fossil fuel companies as renewables replace them. I'll talk more on the reduced future potential of many financial companies in my deep dive on SoFi later on. Considering society's needs will help you spot the disruptor early. When you do, you can ride the journey that changes an industry and creates life-changing wealth for you. Execution ability. Great value and huge need still fails without effective execution, which is why we have to consider the company's ability to execute. Execution ability is the bridge from a vision to products that compound real-world success. Most of a company's ability to execute really comes down to management. A lot of this will be subjective, but there are a number of factors we can look for, like leadership quality. For this, I like to listen to interviews of a CEO or a company's senior management. News articles will typically give excerpts on what a management says. It is better to listen to them directly and get the full detail. Great leaders are passionate about what they do and the mission the company is trying to accomplish. They are really good at going to enormous detail in explaining how their products work, what sets them apart from others, and why customers love them. Using this as the foundation, they're great at then explaining how this feeds into the financial metrics of a company. Getting this information flow right is critical if you're going to build confidence in management's ability to execute. Looking at individual management members can be insightful too. How ethical are they? What have they done previously? What do people say about working with them or for them? What are their values? Good leaders working on a mission bigger than themselves have values that can carry them forever. You can often pick up on bad managers. They are short-termist. They talk about the financial metrics they tweet to meet the target. They also talk about how much cost cutting, including cutting people, they were able to do to meet the target. They often make big promises but mention little specifics on meeting a long-term vision. In reality, management will at some point talk about most of these, but you want to use the proportion in what they do with as an indicator. Track record. The track record of the company and its leadership matters here. Specifically, how well have they done previously in delivering what they said they were going to do? This is the best way of building trust, and it's easiest to back a company and its management that already has a long track record, when all you need to decide is if they can keep up the performance of the last few years for the next few years. Even with a good track record, you need to consider how resilient a company is should there be a recession or a market crash. That's because during a difficult period, a company that has low levels of cash, is losing money, or has high levels of debt might need to raise money. The market would sooner kill them than lend them the money to survive. It's like in a healthy forest, dead wood builds up over time. A recession or market crash is the fire that burns away the dry and dead wood. This is destructive, but it clears space and nutrients for healthy trees to grow stronger. In our world today with AI disruption and escalating war, it seems like a firestorm could happen any random Thursday. Verifying a company's resilience and the ability to execute despite instability will save you many sleepless nights. Done right, the company you've backed might be the one that grows stronger after their competitors burned up like dry wood. Going back to the real-world example I've mentioned throughout this section, Tesla nearly died in the 2008 financial crisis because it didn't have enough cash to survive. Here's a short checklist reminder to determine a company's ability to execute. Check for leadership quality, company track record, and can they survive a market crash. Why a world of AI, disruption, and conflict makes this harder now? We are in a rapidly changing world. AI, disruption, and escalating conflict seems to all be feeding off each other. These forces are changing how we see our needs. For example, is AI automating mundane work, or is it destroying jobs and putting people into poverty? Either way, they're changing how we see value created. Another example would be, was it wise to outsource everything to the lowest cost global supply chain? Or is it better to keep production local where it benefits the communities the company operates in? These forces also impact companies' ability to execute. Being late on AI, someone developing an AI agent to replace you, or your goods being seized at sea because it got tied up in a naval blockade are risks companies face right now. And so we need a new blueprint for how we look at opportunities and pitfalls for the future. That's what I've tried to address here with this framework. To some extent, it was to address my own anxiety and worries for my future. One way I could see that following traditional financial advice wasn't making my financial future more secure. I realized along the way that plenty of other people were experiencing it too. The flip side of a rapidly changing world is that there is enormous opportunity in the new things that's being built right now. This is what I've tried to share here. There's probably plenty of room for improvement, so you're welcome to make it better where you see fit. As we come to the end of the section, I may have been quite negative on mainstream financial analysis and media. I want to say I still use and read them quite a lot. That's because mainstream analysis is still very good at informing you of the health of a company, as it is today. I just don't think it's very good at giving you a picture of how it might perform in the future. That ends the section. Remember, opportunity equals value created times need by society times execution ability. Now that you understand the framework, how do you apply it and how do you find 10x opportunities? I cover this in the next section along with the valuation check. I also do a detailed walkthrough of how I applied it to a company I've made a large investment in. Section 2. How do you find 10x opportunities? I used to invest my savings into companies spoken highly of in financial media and analyst reports, but as I mentioned before, it didn't go so well. My returns were rather pedestrian. After a number of years, I realized that most financial analysts and media talk about how well companies are doing today. Rarely do they talk about a good story of a company that might be big someday. If anything, by the time they're talking about it, it's already too late. Everyone has already jumped on it. Or worse, they mislead you by asking all the wrong questions and miss the things that matter. This is true even of the Financial Times, and I read them every day. They often write great news stories, but for stories they write about companies, I use them mainly as a sanity check. What is the mainstream world thinking, and what are they saying that I might have missed? I would never use what they say as one of my main inputs into what I should buy or sell. The turning point came after I asked myself, where is the most wealth being created? Whether I looked at the last few years or decades, there was one common theme. Most wealth is created by companies that come out of nowhere and revolutionize an industry. It wasn't massive incumbents with resources that make amazing new products. They are often stayed with little innovation happening there. It was companies no one had heard of that often changed the world. Companies like Apple that changed the world first with its Apple II computer. It was the first computer people wanted for their homes. There were just 10 employees when they launched it. Google created an amazing internet search engine that was blazingly fast. Most people take this for granted, but in the late 90s it was astounding how a search engine could give you instant search results. Its main competitor at the time, Yahoo Search, routinely took minutes. There are similar stories for Amazon. But the problem was, how do you find these amazing 10x opportunities that mainstream media don't talk about until it's too late? And the lesson was you had to look in places they weren't talking about. Most of the time, it's a company from outside the industry that does something different. A little guy that punches up. A little guy that's new, disruptive, and innovative. One that makes great products people love because it makes their lives better. When I understood this, I started looking for the same properties in companies solving big problems in the world. And I stopped looking at big companies making big promises. This change in perspective brought me to the same principle. Opportunity equals value created times need by society times execution ability. And we can now use this as a clear guide, provide direction, and serve as a radar for what to look for. You want each of these three variables to be as high as possible. You want a company that makes products that creates huge value for its customers and society. If you find a product that is game-changing to what customers were using previously, then you have an obvious winner. Think of Apple's iPhone, Google's search engine, or Nvidia's chips. You want the need from society to be as large as possible, and you want the company making these products to have as strong an ability as possible to meet that need. What to have on your radar? When you think about where the world is right now, the areas that promises the most value-adding products comes from disruptive innovation. We've already touched on EVs and chips, but it extends to renewables, fintech, 3D printing, genomics, pharmaceuticals, AI, robotics, and I can go on. These are the most obvious areas to have on your radar. There are plenty of YouTubers that provide news services on what's happening in these spaces. I like following them. Again, it's a case of small guys often giving the best quality information because they're new from outside mainstream media and they focus on becoming great at reporting on the niche they cover. Maybe you have a niche knowledge of the area you work in. Because of your experience, you see your business has operated mostly the same for decades. You see what the problems are and what the likely solutions will be. And hence you'll be able to spot the winners building those solutions long before mainstream media starts talking about it. This is what draws me to fintech because I worked at a bank for 18 years. I know how costly it is to provide banking services. And because of the way legacy banks are built, having different divisions for different types of products and different countries, I think even the best banks will take at least a decade to transform if they ever do. At the same time, customers are frustrated because of a fragmented, slow, and costly banking experience. This is why there is a gap for solutions like Bitcoin or companies like SoFi and Block. They promise to rebuild the financial experience from the ground up for the world we live in today. I believe they'll be able to build newer, better institutions and experiences quicker than legacy players can transform. To summarize, to find companies to put on your radar for 10x opportunities, look through sectors going through disruption or likely to go through disruption. Follow niche experts, maybe on YouTube or Twitter. Use your own industry knowledge as an edge. Red flags to watch out for. As you're scanning for what to put on your radar, there are some red flags you can watch out for. For example, what companies say in public but do quietly. Something that really grates me right now is fossil fuel companies moving away from net zero goals they set just a few years ago. These are companies with huge resources like BP, Shell, Total, Ford, and Mercedes. When pressure from society around climate change was high, these same companies came out with goals to make the business more sustainable. They claimed public credit for it back then, but now that attention has moved away, they quietly postpone or cancel plans. To me, this is a big red flag. Companies that don't stick to what they say they're going to do, despite good reasons for it being good for themselves and society. To be honest, I'm not that upset. This is not the first time it's happened and won't be the last. The cause of this is the same reason legacy players struggle to transform themselves, even when they have enormous resources. When transformation is required, they have a poor ability to execute ideas, even when those ideas create new value for society. There are simply too many examples in history of large incumbents choosing to protect their existing business rather than invest in new things that could disrupt it. Some of the most well-known examples are Kodak being disrupted by the digital camera or Blockbuster by Netflix, but it's the general story of disruption. Differentiating between what's real and hype. The Valuation Sense Check. Whether it's social media, YouTube, and sometimes even mainstream media, there seems to always be 1,000 people screaming of the top 3 or top 10 stocks to buy that's going to make trillions. And even when you've done the homework, how do you know that you're not still vulnerable to hype? Here I'm going to tell you the story of how I nearly made a catastrophic investment into FTX. FTX promised to be a revolutionary exchange that was going to change the world. The more I looked into it, the more I bought into how great they could be. Their main product was to give anyone the ability to invest in stocks and derivatives as well as make markets in these products. Essentially, to make a market in a stock or a derivative means that you offer everyone who may be interested in trading it a price where they can buy or sell that share or derivative. On exchanges across the world, rules for being able to do this are quite strict and require you to have enormous amounts of capital. The reason is that if people are regularly buying from and selling to you, you could very quickly lose money and not be able to deliver the thing someone traded with you. So these market-making roles are typically reserved for large financial institutions on major exchanges. The promise of FTX was that they had a groundbreaking risk engine that reduced the capital requirement for market making. Hence they could offer it to more people. They would also tokenize everything so that market participants traded the tokens and thus avoid regulations and the regulatory cost of dealing with regulators. Ooh, that's a lot of regulators. Since they were so confident in their risk model, they serve as the ultimate backstop should things go wrong. It sounded wonderful. Here's an exchange that promises to offer everything from the Tokyo Stock Exchange to the New York Stock Exchange and all things crypto. And they do it at a fraction of the cost. To invest in them, you just needed to buy their cryptocurrency token. I wasn't alone in thinking they are great because the valuation reached over $30 billion at one point. At this point, we are already meeting 2 of the 3 variables in the opportunity equation: value created and need by society. I had created an account and was ready to transfer money and invest. But before I did that, I needed to get comfortable with one final metric, the execution ability. I listened to plenty of interviews of Sam Bankman-Fried and his other close leaders, and I dug through their website extensively and all the documents they had on how they did what they did. I read news stories and analyst reports on their potential. During all this time, FTX kept going up and up. I even thought I missed it at one point, but I just couldn't find what made their risk-taking engine so revolutionary. I couldn't find the specific details. While looking for it, one morning, news broke of suspicious transactions between FTX and its affiliates. 9 days later, over 100 affiliates of FTX filed for bankruptcy, and it all collapsed. It was a fraud, and I dodged a bullet that would have been catastrophic. In this case, that the valuation went from nothing to over $30 billion in 3 years when it didn't have significant revenue also gave me reason to be cautious and rather have all the details before I invest. This valuation was all hype and insufficient substance. The valuation check is the last and critical step on whether you have a real 10x opportunity. Sometimes the company seems solid, but its valuation just goes too far too quickly. Rivian, the EV maker, is a good example of this. The product seems great, the need is there, but it was valued at over $160 billion at its peak in 2021 when it sold less than 1,000 cars that year and was still losing money. In this case, too much future success was already in the price, and you would have to have an incredibly high level of confidence in management's ability to meet and exceed that expected success if you thought it was worth investing in. Today, Rivian's market cap is around $20 billion, still down 90% from its peak. It's at least as good a company as it was in 2021, and if you've done your homework, it's a much better investment opportunity now. Hype, or the emotional sentiment of the market, makes share prices swing wildly. Most of the time, it's disconnected from reality. It's this disconnection from reality that we can use to our advantage when deciding when to buy and when to sell. Nvidia. I did not catch Nvidia, but I want to mention it here because they are one of the most influential companies in the world. Everyone knew AI would eventually change the world. Those who did their homework knew that GPUs would be the type of processor that brings us AI. It's because it is best suited to run neural net models. That Nvidia was the leader in GPUs and working on something everyone would want and buy meant that the opportunity was at least a 10x in the business if they met that need. GPUs used to be mainly for gaming. If Nvidia made widely used AI possible, the number of clients would at least 10x, and so would their share price. They were already creating value. The need of that value was multiples more. If you thought they could meet that need, and the share price didn't already reflect that they would, you had a 10x opportunity. Everything worked out great and continues to work very well for them. When I last checked, their products are sold out for this year. That's hundreds of billions of dollars of product. And it's sold out. So their foreseeable future looks great. But at $5 trillion, they're already the world's most valuable company. And I think it's hard to see them as a 10x opportunity today. They look like a great company with a great future, but that future seems mostly in the price. Next, I'm going to give a detailed example of me applying the framework and investing a significant amount of my money. It's important because I have to walk the talk. I've had two major investments that panned out into more than 10x returns, Tesla and Palantir. The next example is one I see as a 10x opportunity right now. SoFi. I started following SoFi in early 2021. I bought shares in them for the first time in 2022 and I recently added to it. So I have a lot of skin in the game on this one as I think it can pay off for a long time. Let's apply the opportunity equation to them. We're going to go through this in the order of value created, need by society, execution ability, valuation check. By the end, you can apply this to any company. And let's start with what value SoFi creates. What does SoFi actually do that is valuable to society? The pessimist will say they're a bank that provides banking services and they're not special. The optimist will say they're a fintech with the potential to disrupt banking. Here I'm going to list briefly what they do differently and why I think it matters. Firstly, 1. Digitally first bank. Being digitally first, they have a lower cost of providing services compared to banks that still have a lot of physical infrastructure in the form of bank branches. Some may argue that physical branches allows a bank to give a better customer experience, but most younger people don't really care. I myself have not been inside a bank branch in over a year and have done all my banking online or in an app. 2. One app for everything. SoFi offers the full suite of financial services, checking, lending, investing, and trading, all within a single app. A client might start with a simple checking account and later seamlessly add insurance or investment accounts. This sounds simple, but it represents a massive structural advantage over legacy banks. At legacy banks, you're regularly dealing with different entities with different products. Having worked in banking for 18 years, I know how difficult it is to integrate multiple legacy entities into a seamless user experience. And if you've ever made an international payment, have you ever thought, why do you have to fill out so many forms when you've been a client with the bank for years? This friction is mostly because of how they were built over decades. Today, legacy banks are a collection of separate systems and entities, each with its own regulations, compliance costs, and firewalls designed to prevent financial spillover. Take JP Morgan as an example. They are one of the best banks in the world. They also have an app where you can access most of their products. But on the back end, the everyday banking and investment products sit in entirely different legal entities. The retail bank and the asset and wealth management division. They also have an investment bank, and that's a completely different world that does not serve retail clients. Each entity has its own siloed data and regulatory requirements, and there are more entities for other products that we're not going to go into. The point is, when you are in their app, you're really dealing with a collection of giants. They actually have more than one app because of this. From personal experience, I've seen how bringing together entities on the back end ranges from costly to impossible. And after nearly 2 decades in the industry, I've concluded that you cannot simply fix this through technology spend. You have to build a new bank from the ground up, the way SoFi is doing. When you deal with SoFi through its app, you are dealing with the same digitally native organization. This is why I don't think of legacy banks as being SoFi's competitors. Other fintech companies make better examples of being SoFi's competitors. Now, I know people are going to call me out on JP Morgan's enormous technology spend versus SoFi. JP Morgan spends tens of billions of dollars on technology every year to improve. That's more than the total value of SoFi. And they seem to be doing all the right things, spending money on AI, digital, and cloud technologies to create a seamless experience for their customers. Surely, I'm not seriously suggesting that SoFi has an edge over JP Morgan that they can't easily close or take over if they want. But that is what I'm saying. Until JP Morgan starts building a new bank, SoFi will always have an edge over them. That edge extends to other legacy banks. 3. Cheaper to sign up clients. Being digitally native with one app is already paying off for SoFi. You can see this in how much cheaper it is for SoFi to get a new client and then give that client additional products afterwards. Various estimates puts the cost of SoFi signing up a new client around $40 to $60, whereas estimates for JP Morgan run into the $300 to $600 range. Banks don't explicitly say how much it costs them to get a new client, but you can get a good idea by looking at how much they're spending compared to how many new clients they're getting. SoFi added 3.7 million new members last year. They're digitally native and to a large extent those via word of mouth. JP Morgan signed up 1.7 million new checking accounts last year. For that, they spend a lot more on marketing, advertising, incentives to new clients to sign up, maintaining physical branches, and technology. So it's easy to see that it's much cheaper for SoFi to sign up new clients. This is the foundation for minimal extra cost as they continue to grow quickly. 4. They're building Galileo, the AWS of fintech. Galileo is a layer of underlying infrastructure that enables other fintech companies. While SoFi has around 12 million members or customers, Galileo supports around 150 million customers through all the fintech companies that are using it as their underlying infrastructure. This in itself could be enormous. And 5. SoFi recently launched their own stablecoin and offer blockchain-based remittances by the Lightning Network. Anyone who's traveled the world know that you can pay away 3 to 10% of your money through exchange rate and credit card fees. These are potentially massive margins that blockchain remittances can do for a fraction of the cost. Need by society. At this point, I might sound like I'm making a SoFi promotional video because surely other players, especially dominant legacy institutions like JP Morgan, could do this too. After all, they do have a lot more resources and have been around a long time. But many people in the world, including myself, feel like the financial services we get from banks, insurance companies, and even those who manage our retirement funds have hit a bit of a plateau or are only growing slowly and incrementally getting better. This seems more curious when you look at how fast the world is moving in other areas like AI, renewables, medical technology, and the list goes on. And we've had blockchain technology for over a decade, with built-in high trust, which makes it perfect for revolutionizing banking. Instead, our financial services seem only a little better than what we had in the 90s. Granted, we can now do most of it online and don't need to go into a bank branch. But the financial industry didn't even create the technology that made online banking possible. They only piggybacked off the internet companies that did. Instead, since the 2008 global financial crisis and the scandals that came after, trust in many legacy banks in parts of the world, especially in the US, remained lower. And you can't blame customers. It wasn't too long ago that Wells Fargo was caught duplicating customer accounts and charging them for it just to increase their profits. Meanwhile, increased regulations on banks have made it harder to innovate and have pushed costs up. The result is a customer experience that has plateaued for at least a decade. With the technology we have today, it's not hard to see how banks could be so much better. The ideal bank would be high trust and high transparency. Trust is a huge issue because we've seen a massive spike in financial fraud and scammers. Also, many banks have hidden fees, which hurts trust and transparency. This is another huge complaint of consumers. Often, legacy banks are simply not able to be more transparent because the details of what happened is in multiple complex and old systems. We've seen SoFi take a step in the right direction with a no hidden fee promise. Being digitally native, it makes sense that they can be more transparent. Also, blockchain technology has been around for a while and it inherently increases trust. We're seeing some of this with SoFi. They just launched their own stablecoin and Lightning Network remittances in 2025. 2. The ideal bank is ultra low cost. Many legacy banks have endless charges, charging you for monthly maintenance fees, account minimums, overdrafts, inactivity, withdrawing from ATMs, and plenty more commissions and fees when you invest. It's like you're always having to pay to access, store, move, or even have money. This acts as a constant irritant to most consumers. Here, SoFi is a clear leader. They offer no cost on most of this and transparency on what they do. I feel this point is particularly important when it comes to laying the foundation for a long-term, happy relationship with your bank. When you're not constantly irritated by endless charges you didn't know about and can't avoid, you're going to have a happier, higher trust relationship with your bank. A quick point on international payments. If you've ever traveled the world, you know you can pay away anything from 3 to 10% of your money in credit card and exchange rate fees. SoFi launching their own stablecoin and Lightning Network remittances is an important step in winning a part of this market and meeting a large and growing need from consumers. The ideal bank has one single app, everything banking, loans, insurance, crypto, and retirement funds under one login. A simple, clean, no friction experience. Now set aside everything I've said about SoFi. Look only at what I've said about the ideal bank could be. You'll see it's very different to what banks currently offer. There's a huge gap between what society needs and what's available right now. If you overlay society's need, a low-cost, high-trust, high-transparency bank with a seamless experience through one app, with whom most closely provides or promises to provide that need, I think the most likely candidate becomes SoFi. They have a great product with a huge need that needs to be fulfilled. So overall, I think SoFi is the best answer to what does a bank look like if it was rebuilt from scratch in an age of AI, blockchain, and disruption from the fourth industrial revolution. And in my opinion, is probably the best answer to what does a bank look like 10 to 20 years from now. I may be wrong, and there may be others that I might have missed. For now, I think I'm invested into who is most likely to be the winner over the long term. Execution ability. The biggest reason that I have a high enough level of confidence in SoFi's ability to execute is really their track record. For more than 5 years, they've been growing their members at an average and sustained compound annual rate of about 50%. Their revenues have shown similar growth, growing around 30% per year. It went from $621 million in 2020 to $3.6 billion in 2025. They need only sustain their current growth rate for a year or two and the stock price doubles. If they sustain it for 5 years, the stock probably 10x's. I did watch a fair amount of interviews of Anthony Noto as well, and I follow him on Twitter. He's a former Twitter CFO, but there isn't a lot of him out there compared to people like Elon, Alex Karp of Palantir, or Jensen Huang of Nvidia. This may be a good thing because when it comes to financial institutions, a lack of controversy is a big plus. So many institutions have been taken to task over questionable behavior. Many have paid fines and you're probably better off avoiding them. But what I've seen is Anthony Noto strikes me as a sincere person who believes in the mission he's trying to accomplish. Lastly, customers love SoFi. They ranked first in the JD Power 2026 US Investor Satisfaction Study for DIY investors. They have high customer loyalty, with 37% of their growth coming from existing customers adding new products. These things could only be possible if SoFi was doing at least a few things right, and customer trust would naturally be high as a result. SoFi turned profitable last year. This is a major milestone, and it speaks to the track record. High growth companies are very vulnerable to market swings. A market crash can sap the need of a growth company to raise cash when it most needs it. Fintech companies are even more vulnerable because they are more dependent on low interest rates. That SoFi is profitable means the business has reached a level of financial health, robustness, and resilience that makes them much stronger to weather a downturn. They've already had two significant tests. They came out of the 2022 tech crash and the Silicon Valley bank crisis unscathed. But because they're generating cash, it means they likely won't need to raise money when the broader market comes under stress. This milestone is a big confidence booster for anyone thinking about how well the company is able to execute over the long term. That SoFi turned profitable isn't really surprising considering how quickly they've been growing. For 2025, they grew revenue by 37% and had a 31% profit margin. This gives them a Rule of 40 score of 68%. The Rule of 40 score has become a sort of benchmark for fast-growing companies. It tries to address the problem of how do you value a company that is growing fast but may still be losing money. This is useful because we live in a world where most investors use a company's PE ratio, or how much dividends they pay, as some of the most important considerations when investing in a company. PE ratios and dividends paid are outcomes of past performance, and maybe not a very good indicator of current value creation. Hence, it's more vulnerable as conflict and disruption threatens the way we have done things in the past. I find the Rule of 40 score is a great sense check of how healthy a fast-growing company is and how much promise it could have for the future. For context, JP Morgan's Rule of 40 score is 25. They're a legacy bank and perhaps it's not fair to apply it to them, but it demonstrates SoFi's potential against JP Morgan. Specifically, despite JP Morgan being a giant, you can count on the gap closing between them and SoFi. Here are the Rule of 40 scores for other institutions that could most closely be a competitor with SoFi over the long term. Over here we have Adyen, Nubank, SoFi, MasterCard, and Block. Looking at this table, SoFi is the only one with the speed and growth of a fintech company while possessing the structural power of a national bank in the US. This is why I think they have no competitors in the US at the moment. To be honest, Adyen and Nubank may well be great investments. I haven't looked at them closely yet and might do so in the future. The JP Morgan vote of confidence. JP Morgan owns around 4 to 5% of SoFi. Essentially, they've bought a stake in their future competition. But to own this larger stake means they too would have done their homework on SoFi, the execution ability and the future potential. The valuation check. So far, I haven't put in any numbers into the opportunity equation. What I have done is argue that each variable is large or sufficiently large to lead to a 10x opportunity. I argue that the value SoFi creates is large compared to what competitors provide. Society's needs for it is large when you look at how most people bank in the world. And execution ability is sufficiently strong enough to grow into that much bigger need. This makes me comfortable calling SoFi a 10x opportunity when they're currently valued around $20 billion. A successful financial institution that meets a much greater need will be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. For context, JP Morgan is valued around $830 billion, and there are over a dozen financial institutions in the world worth more than $200 billion. SoFi has all the ingredients to grow into one of these top-tier financial institutions by valuation when its products are already there. The valuation check is the answer to the question, does the current share price leave enough room to 10x if the opportunity plays out? In some sense, it can be quite subjective in how you answer this. However, if you look at how I answered it for SoFi and compare it to the Nvidia and other examples I mentioned in the Valuation Sense Check section, you'll see that there can be a gulf between the market fully pricing future promises of a company and not pricing it at all. This comes when we do the work and we act on information that the rest of the world is not yet paying attention to. Said another way, in the case of Nvidia, the world expects it to remain a superstar for many years to come. Very few people think of SoFi as being a potential superstar. Do I eliminate uncertainty? I'm going to say yes, in principle. Here's the truth. No one knows where the price of anything is going to be 3 days or 3 years from now, especially in our rapidly changing world filled with geopolitical risk, disruption, and conflict. But with this principles-based framework, you can pick winners that thrive in our environment. It's like no one knows what the weather is going to be on 17 October next year on the White Mountains of California. But we do know what the climate is like. Pretty harsh. And you probably wouldn't want to be there too long. But you put a bristlecone pine tree there and it thrives for thousands of years. With what we've learned about them, we can be pretty certain they'll continue to thrive. You don't have to know the future or try and predict the weather to be able to decide what will thrive. Just back the right horse or tree or business and you know you'll win. This is where most modern investing goes wrong. People spend way too much time and effort trying to forecast or predict where things are going to be. When if you just have a framework or process for picking the right companies that will survive in our environment, you will thrive. What if I'm wrong? The biggest consequence and worst case scenario of being wrong is that the money I've invested goes to zero. This might happen in the case of fraud being discovered or a banking crisis causes such instability that a whole bunch of banks are wiped out. On the case of fraud, being a nationally chartered bank in the US means SoFi faces enormous scrutiny from regulators such as the Federal Reserve and OCC, the Office of the Controller of the Currency. Having worked in the banking industry for 18 years, I can tell you that regulatory scrutiny can be enormous. It's almost impossible for an individual bank to take action that threatens its own existence. That doesn't mean bad behavior stops, but that regulatory requirements are such that there are sufficient firewalls that prevent it from threatening the bank. What regulators want to ensure is that no bank could unexpectedly go under, because it might threaten the entire banking industry. And they do a pretty good job at ensuring that no bank can take reckless or fraudulent decisions to end itself. A broader banking crisis is different. We had a big one a few years ago that caused Silicon Valley Bank to go under. After years of near zero interest rates, a few banks could not withstand higher interest rates and hence failed. That SoFi survived unscathed is further reason to believe that their business is robust and strong enough to weather future crises that may come. If anything, it's because they are a vertically integrated bank with lower costs is exactly why I think future instability might benefit them. Being more resilient, they could get stronger when others fail. After the 2008 financial crisis, regulators and legislators realized if they are to prevent another banking crisis, they need to heavily increase regulations and compliance requirements from banks. And so they regulated banks into becoming these boring institutions. Regulators want boring banks, because a boring bank that gives no surprises is unlikely to threaten anyone, including themselves. And this is probably the main scenario that plays out should I be wrong about SoFi. The scenario where SoFi becomes just another boring bank. They stop growing fast and the market starts pricing them as being just another bank. In this scenario, SoFi's share price falls to maybe $10. That's the risk reward on SoFi. A potential 10x from current levels of $16, or perhaps a 1/3 loss of my investment if they become just another boring bank. To potentially 10x your money over 5 years or lose 1/3 of it is a fantastic risk reward, one that I cannot ignore. And all SoFi has to do to achieve that 10x return is continue growing the same way over the next 5 years as they did in the last 5 years. For any other doubters, I'm going to play devil's advocate and ask the questions I see commonly floating out there. Finance is highly competitive with many giants in the space and many fintechs appearing all the time. Why couldn't another bank with more resources not come along and just do what SoFi is doing? When you account for the fact that you can't do what SoFi is doing unless you build a new institution from the ground up, you exclude nearly all legacy financial institutions. That's because they're not building new things. They're simply trying to transform what they have, and I don't believe it's possible. There was a good book written on why it's so hard for legacy institutions to transform. It's called the Legacy Inertia Principle and describes this phenomenon well. Once you exclude all fintech companies that does not have a national bank charter in the US, you see that SoFi operates in a space where it doesn't really have any competition, or at least not many competitors. Why SoFi and not Robinhood? SoFi and Robinhood are regularly compared against which may be better. Robinhood shares have been performing very well and it makes sense many think it's better, but there are a number of red flags that stop me from investing in them. Most of Robinhood's revenues come from trading transaction fees. This means when a client trades, Robinhood collects a fee. This is a huge problem, because because transaction fees from trading does very well when the market goes up, but it collapses in a market crash, simply because many people stop trading. So their business revenue is very volatile and vulnerable to a market downturn. SoFi's business is built on a diverse platform that provides everything from everyday banking, loans, insurance, to long-term financial planning and investment products. They also have a bank charter, making the client's business a lot more sticky. Secondly, Robinhood sells their client data. One way is called payment for order flow. This is when a client puts an order into their system and Robinhood will sell that data to another client. So while they tell you might not be paying a fee on a trade, they sell that data to another provider. They will find $65 million for this in 2020. This practice is actually banned in the UK. 3. Robinhood's management has questionable integrity, in my opinion. If you're not yet convinced that Robinhood's management has questionable integrity, they also paid 2 other huge fines for bad behavior. In 2021, they were fined $70 million for widespread and significant harm to customers. And last year, they were fined $45 million for anti-money laundering failures, amongst other things. As a former trader, I know these things are easy to get right. You want to stay away from financial institutions with questionable integrity. They can disappear very quickly. SoFi is expensive with a 40 PE. If the market starts looking at it as a pure bank, it could fall a long way. This is true. As I mentioned earlier, it could probably fall by a third to around $10. However, it need only continue its current growth rate for you to not have to worry about this. Further, if the market starts getting excited about its long-term growth potential, it could go several multiples higher. Just for comparison, both Palantir and SoFi had 80% crashes in 2022. Both companies' revenues have grown 2 to 3 times since then and sit around $3.5 billion to $4.5 billion for last year. But Palantir has gone up more than 20 times, while SoFi is up around 4 times. A part of me thinks this shows the power of hype. Palantir has benefited enormously from being seen as a strong AI play in a world going nuts for AI. SoFi could benefit enormously once the world realizes that the disruption of finance is inevitable and has already started. I invested in them in 2022 when the share price crashed. Back then, I bought at an average of around $6.76. I added over the last few months and now my new average is $10.24. This deep dive was just SoFi, but I did similar amounts of work and sometimes more over many months on Tesla, Palantir, and Bitcoin before I invested. To me, I find you get a better payoff on doing more work on fewer investment opportunities than spreading your time and energy over many. That's it for section 2. You now understand the framework, how to find 10x opportunities and can apply it. You now need to decide when to buy and when to sell. I go through that in the next section. Section 3. When to buy and when to sell. In trading and investing, this is probably one of the hardest problems. Overthinking it is the name of the game here, because getting in at the wrong time could mean you blow up. Getting out at the wrong time could have you missing most of the opportunity. I'm going to give you some principled guardrails that will get you most of the way. When buying, I keep the opportunity equation in mind. Now, I don't keep it in mind exactly as an equation, but more as a balance of its constituent ideas. I'm always thinking about the value this company presents, how much society needs it, and how well they're able to execute to meet it. And of course, nothing is fixed. We live in highly uncertain times. Markets are always moving, volatility always threatens, and we should assume things will happen that we never saw coming. No one knows where anything will be in 3 days or 3 years, and predicting anything is impossible. But what you can do is be ready when the opportunity presents itself. And this is much easier to do than trying a prediction game. When to buy. So at this point, you already have a few stocks in mind of what you're thinking of buying. You're just deciding when. I'm going to give you a framework that massively improves the levels at which you buy. Problem 1. A company you love and want to buy seems very expensive. In market talk, people will often talk about things like it has a very high price to earnings ratio. We now regularly have situations where the price of a company is several hundred times what it makes in a year. For context, the long-term average of the S&P 500 sits around 19. What I noticed about a decade ago is that great fast-growing companies can indeed get very expensive. It's because as people get excited about the company's prospects, everyone piles in and buys more. This often causes an overshoot in the company's price. But there is a mirror to this problem. These company stock prices often also collapses much further than they should. This is when market instability comes or a general market crash happens. You just need to be patient and you can pick them up at enormous discounts. My personal rule of thumb is wait for a 60 to 90% crash. Why such a large number? You need only look at history to see how far companies' share prices fall when fear comes to the market. Tesla, Amazon, Palantir, SoFi, Bitcoin, all of them experienced catastrophic drops during the crashes of 2008, 2020, and 2022. Even Nvidia dropped nearly 70% from its highs during the crash of 2022. You can use this as a gauge for when the next cycle of fear hits. The 60 to 90% range is my guide because that's how much the companies I look at drop during times of crises. Whatever you look at how much it dropped during previous market crises to come up with your range. A company whose stock price is irrationally high will at some point have a stock price that is irrationally low. You just need to be patient when the opportunity comes along. The lesson: the market cycles through exuberance and fear. They are mirrors of each other, and one inevitably follows the other. When a cycle of market fear manifests as a crash, everyone gets punished. This is what you always need to be ready for to buy. Problem 2. The market is crashing. Fear and panic is spreading. How do you know the market won't continue collapsing after you bought? In general, things can always get worse. A large drop in a company's stock price can be followed by more large drops. In fact, they often do. If you buy after a 60% drop and it turns into an 80% drop, you've halved your money. That's painful. What I like to do is wait at least a week after stock has hit a new low, because often new lows are followed by more new lows as fear and panic compounds on each other. Reading a lot of news helps you gauge whether the market has hit peak panic and fear. After all, a market crash is by definition an uncertain, emotional, and turbulent event. If no new lows are hit, I'll leave an order close to the lows and then average in over 2 to 5 trades over 2 to 3 months. Often when my orders get hit, the market will make new lows. But then averaging in over 2 to 3 months is a second safety net. This is how I bought Palantir, SoFi, Bitcoin, and Block during the tech crash of 2022. I first bought SoFi at $10 at the start of March. I knew there was a chance the stock could go lower, but I just thought it was such a great opportunity that I couldn't miss it. It had already dropped more than 60% from its highs. And at $10, I already thought it was an excellent opportunity to 10x and get to $100 over 5 years. Over the next few months, I averaged in, and my final average was $6.76 by June. I even managed to buy some at $4.85 on 10 May, when the low that day was $4.82. After the stock nearly doubled later that month to $8, I felt like a rock star. But the market has a habit of humbling you in these moments. And so the stock went back down later in the year, trading as low as $4.24. In the end, it spent a year close to the lows and below my average. The same story repeated itself in Bitcoin and Palantir. This is my system. You can take it and improve it where you see fit. But ultimately, you need to have a way of staying grounded when everyone else is panicking. The lesson: we are biased to be early. Markets spend a long time at the lows. When buying, patience is well rewarded, and wait for panic to peak. Don't worry too much about catching the absolute low. Problem 3. The stock you've bought isn't going anywhere, or worse, it's dropping. How patient should you be? For this, I'm going to give you an example of how I'm probably wrong on Block right now. Then follow it up with a lesson I've learned. I bought Block, formerly Square Capital, at $68 in 2022. Nearly 4 years later, it's around $71, up maybe 5% from where I bought it. I've probably been too patient with it. Similar to the other stocks I bought in 2022, I bought Block after a nearly 80% crash from its highs. It promised to be a fast-growing fintech company, and as I mentioned in my SoFi deep dive, finance is due for disruption. Buying Block along with Bitcoin and SoFi was my way of ensuring that I would participate in that disruption. I now think I've been too patient with Block, and I'm probably wrong on them. There are other more promising fintechs that have come along, and I should look to sell them in the coming months. Their last set of results were good, but if the next set of results don't show that they're building on it, I'll probably sell. This has been my worst investment over the last 7 years, and it's currently up 5%. This is what wrong looks like when you have a robust framework. Even your mistakes cost you little to no money. Because Bitcoin and SoFi is much higher since 2022, my financial disruption thesis still stands. And I've more than made the required returns for my thesis to have been worth investing in. I'm not too worried that I held on too long. It was a mistake and I'll learn from it. The lesson: be patient with your winners. Be impatient with an underperforming thesis. I wasn't paying attention, and I'm not going to go into a full deep dive here. But if I had to apply the opportunity equation to them now, I may have misjudged the value their products generate because it's not as essential to people's everyday lives. Society's needs have also reduced because there are other competitors doing similar things. And that they were fined in the last few years in order to pay refunds means I got their execution ability wrong. So when they lost their way and growth slowed, I should have made a call to cut earlier. When to sell. Selling is an even harder problem than buying. Once you've bought, it's good to revisit your thesis every few months to see if it still makes sense, if the opportunity has changed, and if you want to adjust the level to sell. I'm not perfect at it, so I'm going to directly share my experience of a few sells here. I have an initial price target in mind, but I'm always reevaluating it against what else is available, and whether I have an appropriate level of cash to buy when the next crash comes. This gives a better balance of variables within my control, as evaluating individual stocks only against themselves for when they may be high is very hard. I've never sold the top of the market, and I don't think anyone does it often. In general, the stock price remains at its high for a very short period of time, but it spends a long time at the lows. And so you could say I'm not that great at selling. I bought Tesla in 2019 at $15.80, and I could have sold it 2 years later in 2021 at over $400. Instead, I believed the hype that Tesla had undergone a step change in innovation. I believed they would be able to replicate the model of building EVs to get to 20 million cars a year by 2030, that FSD was about to land. They were about to produce their own groundbreaking batteries at scale, and along with their solar roof, would have a massive impact on the energy sector. They had a fundamentally better way of building supercomputers with their Dojo project. Cybertruck was about to land, and it was rumored to have nearly 2 million back orders, and the Tesla Semi would take over trucking. Most of that did not come to pass. Instead, Elon went on a political expedition, doing enormous harm to the brand. Now, if they don't get FSD, their robotaxi service, and Optimus right soon, their share price could well be in for a material drop. That's because competition has caught up in most other areas of their business, and this year could still get ugly, with shocks we don't yet know of coming from the Iran war and spreading conflict. I also didn't sell because I thought of the capital gains tax I would have to pay. I didn't feel confident about another opportunity, and leaving the money in cash is expensive because inflation destroys it. In this case, my price target was hit, and I should have sold but didn't. A mistake I can hopefully learn from. You could say the opposite happened with Palantir. I bought them at $9.26 in 2022, when they got to $125 last year and quickly collapsed, almost halving to $65. I thought I missed it and I would sell if the price got that high again. So I left a sell order close to the high at $123.95. I got filled for the 13.3 times return in 3 years, but Palantir continued over $200. The lesson is that you can't predict how much the market will overshoot. Now the world thinks Palantir has no competition and a model that can be scaled to everyone from healthcare to the military. I suppose we'll see if that happens. This time, I did not want to make the same mistake I did with Tesla and believe the hype, because they still make very little money to justify such a huge valuation. These have been my 2 best investments I've ever made, and for neither did I sell anywhere close to the best moment. But I still have my 25x return on Tesla, and I've banked the 13.3x of Palantir, which gives me room for new investments. And this is the most important thing, to buy when the 10x opportunity presents itself, and then sell when it has fulfilled that promise. If new events come along that suggest it might go further, treat that as separate and be careful about falling for hype. How do you know when you're wrong? This can be a challenging question to answer because it can have endless considerations, but you have to regularly ask yourself this. In the SoFi deep dive, I answered this in detail for them, and I mentioned bits of it throughout this framework. Here I'm going to try and answer it in general and give a summary. Firstly, when you answer this question, you want your mindset to be clear. If a market crash is making you panic, switch off your phone and all your news sources and maybe sleep on it. That goes for the hype cycle too, because the risk is FOMO makes you do something rash. The first guardrail is applying the opportunity equation and checking that your investment thesis still holds. Second, ask yourself what you might have gotten wrong when assessing each variable in your thesis. Then you can ask AI what's the biggest argument out there against the company you're wanting to invest in, like I did with SoFi. Then defend against each of those arguments. If you've done your homework well up till this point, you'll see most of the counter arguments as misinformation. or by people who don't understand how the company or industry works, or who does not see the long-term potential of the company. Meaning, most of the counter arguments will be easy to defend against. There will probably be one or two that you think could be a material risk to you. If there isn't, the company is probably already exploding. For these one or two cases, you'll have to make the call that the work you've done is solid enough to give you confidence and you're doing the right thing. And more importantly, that the risk reward is worth it. 3 red flags that should immediately trigger a reassessment. 1. Bad behavior. You should immediately pay attention to news about fraud, the company being fined for lack of controls, or anything similar. You should assume the company will minimize the effect of this, and you should not accept explanations that they didn't know or they did nothing illegal. News of bad behavior almost always indicates a bigger issue with the company's culture. Here, Warren Buffett's quote is a very good rule to live by. There is never just one cockroach in the kitchen. For every problem you see, there are likely many more you don't know of. 2. A change in growth. A company that's been growing quickly for a long time and suddenly stops growing for several quarters is something that should trigger a reassessment of your thesis. This doesn't mean you should sell your investment or not invest. It just means you should go through the process and ask yourself if it still makes sense to. 3. A change in profits. A company that suddenly starts to lose money should trigger a reassessment, especially if it was unexpected. Again, it doesn't mean you should sell or not invest. It just means you should go through the process and ask yourself if it still makes sense to. If they're losing money, the reassessment may be more urgent because it may threaten their ability to survive a market crash or recession. No guarantee to anything. If you do this right, you'll be fine. You're going to catch a few 10x returns in 5 years, and you're likely to lose little to no money on your worst investments. Of course, many will say that there are no guarantees to anything, and that's true for life in general. But because you followed a principles-based framework, you're likely going to be fine and come out on top. So even if a 1929 stock market crash happens, this framework is robust enough that you would have avoided buying at the top. It may even have given you an opportunity to buy at the lows. Either way, a few years later, you would still have been one of the best performers when many others were completely wiped out. And that's the best place to be. Again, this isn't about forecasting or predicting where anything is going to be in 5 years. No one can do that. It's about picking the right companies that will thrive in our environment. In the same way, we would pick a bristlecone pine to thrive on the White Mountains of California, even though we don't know what the weather is going to be like on any particular day in the future, or how much the tree will grow and spread. But we can be fairly certain that it's the best tree to thrive in that climate. These guidelines will go a long way in helping you buy at better levels, and it will give you comfort when you don't buy at the absolute low or sell at the absolute high. But remember, these are guidelines. The North Star remains the opportunity equation, and it's important to assess and reassess each opportunity as you see it necessary. Now that you have clear guidelines on when to buy and when to sell, you still need to decide how much to buy. We cover that in the next section. Bonus section. How much to buy? Many people will understandably be worried about putting all their eggs in one basket. I too was worried about this in the beginning. I was very cautious when I started moving away from traditional advice. When I sold my ETFs and bought a single stock Tesla, I took 10% of my total savings available. Now that Tesla is up more than 20 times, it's a lot more than 10% of my total portfolio. But I haven't sold a single share, and I'm okay with that, because as Warren Buffett would say, our favorite holding period is forever. When you've done the work and found a winner, it's good to be patient with it. I sell when I think a better opportunity comes along or when I need to get my cash levels up. I don't sell because I think the company has grown too large for my portfolio. So I invest up to 10% of my total portfolio in one company. Then I'm happy to leave it as it grows. For me, this is sufficiently cautious that I don't face catastrophic risk. Most stories I've read of people who built a lot of wealth is that they made most of it on a few ideas that they go in on in a big way. After you've done the work and found a great opportunity, you want to reward your effort. Invest in it. I'm not a financial advisor and I can't tell you what to do, but I found 10% as a guideline and then leaving it has served me well. I only have 4 large holdings in my current portfolio: Tesla, Bitcoin, SoFi, and MSTR. MSTR came a few months ago. But if all 4 of these went to zero tomorrow, I'd probably have to think about getting a job again, and I'm okay with that too. Again, to quote Warren Buffett, diversification is protection against ignorance. It makes little sense if you know what you are doing. He is also known for lecturing students that if they had a punch card of just 20 investment decisions they could make in their life, they would drastically improve their financial welfare. Doing the work, focusing on quality, discipline, and patience will take you much further. I don't have a rule for this, but I'm happy having my entire portfolio in 4 or 5 stocks, and then I watch them closely. To help my peace of mind, I still do all the smart personal finance stuff like maxing out tax-efficient savings and keeping a rainy day fund. Between these, my living expenses is covered sufficiently far forward that I can think clearly about how I invest. In short, when you decide how much to buy, don't invest money you might need in a few months. Do the work first, focusing on quality, discipline, and patience. Have a rule for how much of your total funds you're happy to invest. I use 10%. Final thoughts. That's it for this short course. To end, let's recap what I promised this would be and what we covered. At the start, I promised you a full investing framework that would help you retire young. We then discussed getting to 10x opportunities to make this possible. Then using first principles thinking of what creates real value, what makes society need it, and can they execute, we defined a framework and put it into an equation. Opportunity equals value created times need by society times execution ability. Through a first principles lens, we discussed what each of these 3 variables are and what it is not so that you can understand the framework. We then discussed why a principles-based framework is important in a world of AI, disruption, and conflict. Then we moved on to how do you find 10x opportunities. We talked about what to have on your radar, red flags to watch out for, differentiating between what's real and hype, the Valuation Sense Check. We then did a deep dive on SoFi, a stock I've invested in and think is currently a 10x opportunity. In it, I answered the question of, do I eliminate uncertainty? We then moved on to when to buy and when to sell. We discussed various problems you may face, such as what if a company you're interested in seems expensive, what if the market is crashing, what if the stock you've bought isn't going anywhere or is dropping. We talked about how do you know when you're wrong, then highlighted 3 flags that should trigger a reassessment of your investment thesis: behavior, a change in growth, and a change in profitability. We discussed while there is no guarantee to anything, following a principles-based framework will mean you thrive. The metaphor I keep going back to is it's not about predicting what the weather is going to be like on any particular day on, say, the White Mountains of California. This is impossible. It's about understanding the climate and picking the bristlecone pine we know is most likely to thrive in that environment. In a bonus section to this course, we discussed how much to buy so that you can feel comfortable moving to this framework. If you've watched this far, thank you for your time and attention. I did a lot of work on this, and I hope you got a lot of value out of it. If you did, please click the like button. Subscribe for more content like this in future. I'll be launching a newsletter in a few months. In it, I'll discuss extensions to this framework, give quick takes on how it's performing against world events at the time, and I'll use my own portfolio as a pulse. This is to help you learn, but also so that you can see how these principles are applied in real time. Also, it's easy to learn from someone applying a framework and dealing with the highs and lows of markets. If that's something you're interested in, sign up below. In this uncertain world we live in, may you find the financial freedom to live the life you want to live. Good luck.